A faint cry rose from the edge of the forest, thin and trembling, almost swallowed by the heavy air after rain. It was not the sound of birds or cattle moving in the fields, but something deeper. Roar. The villagers walking along the path paused. They listened again. The cry came once more, high and strained, echoing from the hollow ground beyond the trees. Moving cautiously, a small group made their way toward the sound. Their feet sank slightly into the damp soil, the grass heavy with droplets from the morning storm. At the edge of a clearing, they stopped. Below them stretched a wide, uneven pit carved by the rains. Inside it, half hidden in mud, lay a baby elephant. Its skin was darkened by wet earth, its small legs thrashing weakly, its trunk curling upward in effort. Every movement seemed to drag it deeper, and its cries carried a sharp edge of desperation. The villagers stood quietly for a moment, the weight of the scene pressing against them. The calf was no more than a year old, still fragile in its growing body. Its ears flapped slowly, not in play but in fatigue. Mud clung to its sides, pulling against its strength with every attempt to rise. The more it struggled, the heavier its body seemed to become, until it fell still, breathing in shallow bursts. One of the older men whispered, "It's only a baby." His words were almost carried away by the air, but the others heard. They edged closer to the rim, careful not to startle the animal further. The pit itself had formed where the earth had collapsed after weeks of rain, the walls steep and slick. No creature could climb out unaided, least of all a calf still dependent on its mother. Somewhere in the distance, the herd must have been searching. The cries that once would have echoed between mother and calf were now muffled by earth and fear. The villagers lowered their voices, speaking only when needed. Their presence was meant to reassure, not to intrude. One woman knelt, her hands pressed into the damp soil, watching the small elephant's sides rise and fall. Its eyes, wide and ringed with mud, blinked slowly, too exhausted to resist. A faint rumble came from its chest, softer than its earlier cries, more a plea than a protest. The air grew still around them. Even the insects seemed to pause in their chorus. The villagers exchanged quiet glances, unspoken agreement passing between them. They could not leave the animal where it was. It would not survive the night if it remained trapped. Yet the way out would not be easy. The walls of the pit threatened to collapse under too much weight, and the calf's panic could cause harm if not handled with care. For now, they stayed close, letting the animals sense their presence. A young man crouched low and spoke gently, his voice no louder than the wind. "You're not alone," he murmured. His tone carried calm, though he knew the elephant would not understand his words. Still, the sound of quiet reassurance was something the calf seemed to pause at. Its ears twitched faintly, its eyes shifting toward the source of the voice. The villagers remained there at the edge of the pit, their figures forming a silent circle above the trapped calf. They watched as it tried once more to push against the mud, its legs trembling, trunk reaching up before sinking back down. The struggle ended quickly, its body sinking into stillness again. In that fragile silence, the decision was made. The calf could not climb free. The villagers would stay, and they would find a way. The calf shifted suddenly, its body lurching sideways as if it still believed escape was possible. Mud splashed against the pit walls, its trunk raised in a desperate arc before sinking back down. A sharp cry followed, louder than before, but it broke quickly, fading into a hoarse rumble. The villagers flinched at the sound, not from fear but from the ache it carried. They leaned closer to the edge, their hands tightening around the tools and ropes they had brought, though none yet moved. Every action needed thought. Every step demanded patience. The calf tried again, legs trembling with effort. Its hindquarters rose slightly, then slid back into the wet earth with a heavy thud. The impact sent a dull vibration through the ground, followed by silence. Its ears sagged, pressed close against its mud-soaked skin, and its chest heaved in shallow waves. The strength it had spent in frantic motion was leaving it. Each attempt grew weaker, the body of the young elephant yielding to exhaustion. Around the pit, the group of villagers grew. Some had been called from the fields, others left their small fires and came with quiet urgency. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes trained on the calf below. No one raised their voice above a whisper. The air itself felt heavy, and their silence mirrored the weight of the moment. Even the children, usually restless, clung to their mother's sides, their faces solemn. One of the men leaned forward and spoke softly, his words steady and low. "Stay calm, little one." The calf's ears twitched faintly at the sound, but its body remained still, sides rising and falling with visible effort. Its trunk stretched once more toward the rim of the pit, curling weakly before slipping back into the mud. The motion was less a struggle now and more an instinct, a last gesture of need. The villagers exchanged looks, reading in each other's faces the same thought. The calf was running out of time. A few of the older men tested the earth near the rim with their feet, judging how deep the mud went, how far they could approach without causing the ground to collapse inward. The soil was soft, untrustworthy. Too much weight could break it, endangering both the calf and those who tried to help. The sun was climbing, sending pale light across the clearing. The air warmed, carrying the scent of wet soil and broken grass. Insects resumed their slow hum, but their sound only deepened the stillness around the pit. The baby elephant's movements grew smaller, its head lowered, resting briefly against the mud. A long sigh left its chest, more felt than heard. A woman stepped forward, her scarf trailing as she bent near the rim. Her eyes were fixed on the calves, and for a moment the two remained locked in a quiet exchange. The animal's gaze, heavy with fatigue, met hers before drifting shut again. She turned her head slightly, speaking in a voice that barely carried. "We must hurry or it will not last." The men nodded. Yet no one rushed. They knew that haste would bring risk, and risk here meant collapse. Instead, they began to move deliberately, choosing positions, uncoiling ropes, testing knots. Each gesture was measured, slow, as though the act of preparing itself was part of the rescue. The calf stirred again, its body quivering. Its trunk lifted only halfway this time, trembling in the air before dropping against its chest. A faint groan escaped, no longer sharp, only weary. The villagers held their breath, watching the fragile rise and fall of its chest, knowing the struggle had passed into stillness. Above the pit, human voices stayed low, almost like a prayer carried on the air. The weight of the moment pressed close, binding them all in silence. The calf lay half buried in mud, its strength nearly gone, while hope remained balanced on the edge of time. The villagers began to move with quiet purpose, their voices hushed, their steps steady. A length of rope was uncoiled from one man's shoulder, its fibers worn from years of work in fields and around cattle. Another brought a spade, sinking it gently into the earth, testing where the ground held firm. There was no rush, only deliberate preparation. The calf lay in the pit below, its body slack against the mud, its eyes half closed. Though its chest still rose and fell, each breath seemed fragile, as though borrowed from the patience of those above. The first rope was lowered, sliding across the damp wall of the pit. A young man braced himself, looping it around a thicker tree trunk to anchor it. The knot was checked twice, pulled tight by careful hands. The plan was simple but dangerous. Create paths, give the calf leverage, and pull only when it showed the strength to respond. To act otherwise might harm it further. Several men climbed partway down the slope, their toes digging into the mud. They used their spades not to dig recklessly, but to carve small steps, grooves where the calf might gain purchase. Each movement of earth was quiet, deliberate, as though the ground itself was being invited to help. When the soil slid back, they pressed it firm again, shaping it patiently. The calf stirred faintly at the sound of shifting earth. Its trunk lifted and fell with a wet slap, then curled weakly around nothing. Its eyes blinked open, dull but still searching. For a moment, it shifted its weight, trying to push its chest upward, but the effort ended quickly. Its legs trembled and slid back under it. One of the men closest to the edge spoke softly, almost as if to a child. "Easy now. We'll help you." The animal gave a faint rumble deep in its chest, not strong enough to echo. Its ears flapped once, heavy and slow, before falling limp again. The sound reached the villagers, and they paused in their work, each one holding still for a heartbeat, allowing the calf's voice to settle into the moment. Then they returned to their task gentler than before, their hands careful with every shift of soil. The ropes were lowered further. Some laid against the mud to serve as grips. Others prepared to loop around the calf's body if it allowed. Two men descended close enough to touch its flank, their palms sinking into the wet hide. The calf gave a startled jolt, a half kick that splashed mud across the slope. But the men did not retreat. They remained calm, pressing their hands flat and steady against its side until the animal's trembling eased. With slow precision, the rope was guided under its belly. The calf resisted at first, a groan escaping as its body shifted against the pressure. But the hands holding it were steady, and soon the rope was in place. Another was drawn around its chest, looped carefully so it would not tighten against its throat. Each knot was checked, pulled, and secured against the anchored tree. At a signal, the men above leaned their weight into the ropes, testing them. They did not pull hard, only enough to feel resistance, to be sure the knots would hold when the time came. The calf's body shifted slightly, lifted an inch, then settled back. Its eyes opened wider, confusion flickering in their dark shine. Its trunk lifted weakly toward the rim, reaching as though sensing the chance of release. The villagers paused again, letting the calf rest, their own breathing heavy but measured. The mud pit had become a place of quiet labor, where strength was matched not in force but in patience. Every rope, every handful of earth carried the same intention: to give the animal a way back to life. The ropes tightened with care, the villagers leaning their weight in unison. The calf's body shifted, its legs sliding across the mud as it struggled to find footing. A chorus of grunts came from the men above, but no one shouted, no one hurried. The pull was steady, measured, each motion deliberate, as though they feared that one sudden tug might undo all the fragile progress. The calf gave a startled cry as its chest lifted higher, its legs kicking weakly against the slope. Mud cascaded down in sheets, covering its flanks, but still the ropes held. Its trunk reached upward, curling against empty air, as if searching for something to grasp. The men closest to the edge whispered encouragement, their voices low, offering the sound of calm in the middle of strain. "Almost there," one said gently, the words carried only to those nearest. Step by step, the animal's body rose from the pit. Its legs buckled beneath it, scraping along the wall, but the grooves carved earlier gave it a chance to push. The ropes bore most of its weight, guided by the rhythm of human hands working together. Mud clung to the calf's belly, thick and heavy, yet each pull lifted it higher. Finally, its forelegs reached the rim, hooves scraping across solid ground. The calf let out a deep, broken rumble, the sound carrying both exhaustion and sudden will. Its body trembled violently as it tried to push, but the effort was uneven. The villagers adjusted the ropes again, releasing tension, then pulling once more, never forcing, only guiding. The calf heaved forward, its head and shoulders clearing the edge, its body dragging like a soaked cloth behind it. With one last unified pull, the animal slid onto the grass. The earth shook slightly under its weight, mud spraying as it collapsed onto its side. For a moment, the villagers froze, their hands still gripping the ropes. The calf lay motionless, chest rising in shallow bursts. Then, with a slow groan, it shifted, its trunk curling toward the ground as it tried to rise. Its legs quivered as it struggled upright. Twice it stumbled, collapsing back into the mud before finally managing to stand. Its knees knocked together, its body swaying with the effort of balance. Streams of water and earth slid from its skin, painting the ground beneath in dark streaks. Each breath came hard, loud in the sudden silence that followed. The crowd of villagers stepped back instinctively, widening the space around it, their eyes fixed on the fragile figure that now stood free. The calf lifted its head, ears drooping heavily at its sides. Its trunk swung once in the air, uncertain, then reached outward toward the horizon. For the first time, its voice rose again, not sharp, but stretched, a call that carried beyond the clearing. The sound was thin, but it broke the quiet, echoing into the distance where trees stood waiting. The villagers did not move closer. They remained still, some lowering the ropes, others wiping mud from their hands, their faces marked by both relief and awe. What had been a desperate pit now lay behind them. But before them stood the trembling shape of life, fragile yet unbroken. The calf shifted its weight again. Hooves pressing into firmer ground, trunk raised higher now. Its eyes blinked rapidly as though the world had grown too bright after the dimness of mud and struggle. A final shiver passed through its body, scattering drops of soil in every direction. Then it stood more firmly, balanced though still quaking. The rescue was done. The villagers stepped further back, their circle widening until they were only silent figures at the edge of the field. No applause came, no words of triumph. Only a quiet stillness settled over them as the calf stood in the open once more, trembling, alive and free. The forest edge held its breath as the small calf stumbled forward, its legs still trembling with the strain of the long rescue. The mud clung to its sides in heavy patches, drying in uneven streaks that cracked beneath the afternoon light. Every step seemed uncertain, as though the ground itself was unfamiliar, yet ahead stretched a path marked by scents and echoes older than memory. A low rumble drifted through the air, deep and resonant, the kind of sound that reached beyond the ear and into the chest. The calf paused, lifted its trunk, and let out a wavering call in answer. From beyond the line of tall trees, a reply came. The herd had been waiting. They had kept their distance during the rescue, restless yet bound by an instinctive understanding that the humans worked not as predators, but as helpers. Now, with the calf freed, their patience shifted into motion. The forest stirred as large shapes emerged in flickers of shadow and sun, ears spreading wide, trunks lifted to catch the air. The villagers stepped back, forming a quiet line. Their hands hung heavy at their sides, still marked by mud, their shoulders eased after hours of labor. Not one voice rose above a whisper. They watched the calf hesitate, torn between the safety of the familiar faces that had carried it through its darkest struggle and the call of its own kind waiting among the trees. A man at the edge gave a small nod and whispered, barely audible, "Go on, little one." The calf lowered its head, took one unsteady breath, and began to walk. Its steps grew faster, a clumsy rush that scattered leaves and loosened earth. When the gap narrowed, the leading matriarch surged forward. She swung her trunk low and touched the calf across its shoulders, brushing away the last film of mud as if reclaiming it. A sound rose from her chest, deep, steady, and full, the tone of recognition and relief. Around her, the others closed in. Younger elephants circled with cautious excitement, their trunks tracing the calf's sides in quick, darting gestures. Older ones stood firm, creating a wall of presence, guarding against any unseen danger. The calf pressed into them, small body half buried in the forest of legs, trunk lifted high toward the warmth of their bodies. A shiver ran through its frame, the tension of hours finally giving way. The villagers remained still, watching from a respectful distance. None stepped closer. None attempted to claim the moment as their own. Their work was finished the moment the herd arrived. Yet something lingered between them and the animals, an invisible thread spun in silence. The forest itself seemed to soften, holding the weight of the reunion with a kind of reverence. Gradually, the herd began to move. They shifted back into the deeper trees, each step deliberate, each body vanishing into the shifting shadows. The calf stayed close to its mother now, pressed tight against her side. Once it turned its head slightly, as though catching one last glimpse of the people standing at the clearing's edge. Then it followed her into the dark green light, where the forest swallowed sound and shape alike. The villagers did not follow. They stood until the last trace of gray skin and slow movement had melted into the undergrowth. The only sound left was the rhythm of insects in the grass and the low sigh of wind passing through the leaves. As the sun lowered, its light slipped between the trees in long golden shafts, laying soft patterns across the trampled ground. The villagers turned homeward, their steps quiet, their faces still marked with mud and memory. Behind them, the forest closed again, carrying within it the image of a small calf returned to its family, disappearing into the light.